What's good, YouTubers and YouTubettes? This is JB Sports back again with another one. King Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis. This is the most talked about and discussed potential matchup in the sport of boxing going on right now. King Ryan did an interview yesterday with TMZ, and he said, look, this is the fight that's got to happen next. Just like Joshua must fight Fury next, I must fight Gervonta Tank Davis next. You know, his matchup with Luke Campbell when he was able to capture the WBC interim lightweight title by knocking him out in the 7th round with a body shot, that fight did 7.7 million views on YouTube. The guy has a huge following, and he's got a lot of buzz around his name. Now, Gervonta Tank Davis' last fight versus Leo Santa Cruz was on Showtime pay-per-view. It did 225,000 pay-per-views. In the statement that Ryan Garcia made on TMZ saying that this is the biggest fight in the world or in the United States alongside of Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury. These are the two biggest fights in the sport of boxing. And it kind of made me think, is this fight bigger than Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford here in the United States? And I say yes. I say this fight is bigger. I say King Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis is a bigger fight in the United States than Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. I say bigger, not more significant. Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford is more a significant fight, because it's going to tell you who's the top dog at 147 pounds, the welterweight division. That's the more significant fight. But I'm saying the more bigger fight is King Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis due to the crossover appeal for that matchup. Both guys have a huge social media following. You know, Ryan Garcia has millions upon millions of social media followers, as does Gervonta Tank Davis. Now, Errol Spence Jr. is shown to be a pay-per-view star. His last 3 pay-per-views have been successful. He's done 3 consecutive pay-per-views, to be exact. Terrence Crawford is a top pound-for-pound fighter, but his pay-per-view numbers have been not good. He's done 2 pay-per-views. One did 50 to 60,000 versus Victor Postol. That was his first pay-per-view. And the second one against Amir Khan did around 150 to 170,000 pay-per-views. The fighter versus Amir Khan, who had supposed to have a big name and a huge draw over there in the UK. That fight took place in the United States, and it did 150 to 170,000 pay-per-view buys here in the U.S. So again, King Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis is a bigger fight in the United States than Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. I would say that Gervonta Tank Davis versus King Ryan Garcia, I say that fight probably does. It has the potential to do, I say the max it does is a million pay-per-view buys. It'll do anywhere between 500,000 and a million pay-per-view buys. Now, Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford, I think the max that fight would do, the very max that fight would do, in my opinion, would be 500,000. I think that would be the max that fight would do. I think you're looking at somewhere between 360,000 pay-per-view buys and 500,000 pay-per-view buys for Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. I think that's the ballpark figure you're looking for those two guys. A lot of people want to see the fight. Don't get me wrong. Them guys are two of the top fighters in the sport of boxing. Those guys have accomplished more in the sport of boxing than King Ryan Garcia or Gervonta Tank Davis. But that's not just what this is all about. It's about who can bring in the casual boxing fan. You know the hardcore boxing fan is going to be there for Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. And for that matter, they'll be there for King Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis. But the key is, can you bring over the casual boxing fan? Can you bring in the people that don't follow boxing closely? The people that went to see Floyd Mayweather Jr. pay-per-view fights. The people that go to see, people tune in and watch Canelo Alvarez pay-per-view fights. People that tune in to watch Manny Pacquiao pay-per-view fights. People that tune in to watch Floyd Mayweather Jr. pay-per-view fights. You got to be able to bring those people to the table. You got to bring those people's eyes to the TV sets to watch. And I believe more of them will go to Gervonta Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia due to their huge social media following than they would go to Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Bud Crawford unification matchup at welterweight division. So we'll see what happens, and we will see what transpires. Now, will this fight happen? That remains to be seen. Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Bud Crawford have been going on for 2 years. 2 years in the making, and the fight has not been made. A lot of people are frustrated, and a lot of people are starting to kind of lose interest in that fight. A lot of people are starting to accept that that fight might not never take place. As Errol Spence Jr. has said recently that the fight is 60-40 in his favor. It could be 70-30, whatever we decide to give him. And Terence Crawford responded to that saying that accident must have knocked a couple of screws loose in his head. And he's crazy. It's either 50-50 or there's no fight. And I done moved on. You see, he's basically saying, you see that Errol Spence Jr. really don't want to fight with those type of demands. And I'm moving on. So that fight is in jeopardy of not ever taking place. Hopefully it will take place. But Terence Bud Crawford seemed to say that if it is not 50-50, that he's not going to take the fight. So we have to see how that plays out. But right now, it's 2 years in the making, and it still has not been made. Now, this fight here between King Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Tank Davis, both fighters say they want to fight next. Could it happen in April of 2021 or in June of 2021? That's the earliest I see it happening. Or maybe both fighters have one interim fight, and then they fight in September, October 2021. But the fight seems to be more on the horizon than Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Bud Crawford. And that's a check in that column for that particular fight. They're not willing to, they don't want to stall it out and talk about this and haggle over who's the A side, who's the B side. You heard Gervonta Tank Davis say in his Instagram interview that he don't care about the A side, B side, C side. He just want to get in there and fight. He don't care about all the talking Ryan Garcia doing. He said he wants to get in there and let his fist do the talking. So, they saying all the right things. Nobody haggling over money. And Ryan Garcia said the same thing on TMZ. He said he don't care about money. He said this is about legacy. He said, it's not about, both of us going to make good money, but it's not about that for him. He wants to beat Tank Davis and show the world that he's one of the best fighters out there. So I like how both guys are talking. They're not talking about who's the A side. They're not talking about who's going to get the lion's share of the purse. They're talking about making the fight happen because they want to fight each other. Gervonta Davis said, look, I think it's too soon for Ryan Garcia, but he's been calling me out for the last year and a half to 2 years. He's been wanting to fight me. So I'm going to give him what he's looking for, and I'm going to get in there and fight the guy. I don't do a lot of talking. I let my fist do the talking. And when I get in that ring, I like a lot, I'm going to bring the violence to him. I'm paraphrasing what Gervonta Tank Davis said in reference to a matchup with Ryan Garcia. So it's going to be a good fight, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be a much anticipated fight. And it's a fight that is the biggest fight in the United States. Joshua versus Fury is the biggest fight in the UK. But the biggest fight in the United States is Gervonta Tank Davis versus King Ryan Garcia. Not Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Bud Crawford. A fight that probably should already have taken place. And it's a potential that it might not ever happen if these guys don't come to some sort of agreement on the monetary demands for each fighter in the split for each fighter is going to make on this potential matchup. So we'll see what happens, and we will see what transpires. Let me know your thoughts about King Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis being the biggest fight in the United States, not Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Bud Crawford. When you got two champions fighting, you got two belt holder Errol Spence Jr. who holds the WBC and IBF title, versus Terence Bud Crawford, who holds the WBO welterweight title. And you got over here on this other side of the equation, King Ryan Garcia, who has the WBC interim belt, which if you go to the rankings in the major sanctioning belt rankings and champions listed, that belt is not listed in any of those websites, in any of those rankings. But they got a belt for him, green belt, WBC interim belt, but that's not a major belt. That's basically what I'm here to tell you guys. Versus, it'll be at 135 pounds, versus Gervonta Tank Davis, who holds the WBA welterweight title. Maybe the WBA lightweight title, but it's the regular world WBA welterweight title. As the WBA super The Super WBA lightweight champion is Teofimo Lopez. So he is the king of the WBA, not Gervonta Davis, who holds a secondary version of that belt. So you have two guys that basically not holding any major titles at 135 pounds, fighting against each other. But it's a more appealing fight, and a fight that's bigger than a fight that's featuring two champions in a higher weight division, in a more glamorous weight division throughout the history of the sport of boxing, the welterweight division. That fight is not as big as two guys fighting in the lightweight division. That just lets you know that it's all about bringing in the casual fans, and these two guys have been able to capture the imagination of the casual boxing fans due to their social media following, that being King Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Tank Davis. Let me know your thoughts about me saying that this fight is bigger. Gervonta Tank Davis versus King Ryan Garcia is bigger than Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Bud Crawford. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with what I said, or do you disagree? Do you think that fight is bigger? I'm saying that fight is more significant, but it's not bigger than Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis. Let me know your thoughts and subscribe to JB Sports, the man, the myth, the legend. I holla.